Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David E.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs.
Aloha, happy Wednesday. Thanks so much for joining us here on Spotlight Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise, joined by Ryan Kalei-Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. We are delving into the world of politics today, Ryan. The ballot boxes are up, the drop boxes in front of Honolulu Hale. The ballots are starting to go out into the mail, and people are starting to make their decisions, firming up those decisions, especially in the race for lieutenant governor. We have had almost all of the candidates on this program here for a one-on-one on the Democratic side. And today we finished that series.
That's right. We're continuing in the conversation with these candidates, the top leading candidates for the Democratic ticket for lieutenant governor. And joining us this morning is candidate Keith Amemiya joining us. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
This, as Yanji alluded to, it's getting into crunch time here. We have ballot boxes that are being set up, ballots being put in the mail. Your thoughts as you head into this crucial part of your campaign?
Well, I'm excited. It's showtime. This is what we've all been working towards. I've been traveling across the state, campaigning, listening to voters across the state, and the theme is the same. They're concerned about the future direction of our state. They're tired of the same political leadership. They don't have faith in our political leadership, and they want change. And that's the message I'm promoting, that I will bring necessary change to government. We need to move forward. We need new ideas. And I've got a lot of support across the state, and looking forward to the next 3.5 weeks or so before the August 13th primary election date.
And tell us a little bit about how you see this office and what you think is your unique skill set that you bring to it. Because unlike the governor's office, for instance, there's not really a set outline task list or set of responsibility. It really is what you make of it. What do you think that you bring that perhaps your opponents don't?
Well, you're exactly right, Yanji. It is what you make of it. The Lieutenant Governor Josh Green has proven that you can take an active role in working with the governor on the critical issues facing our state. But where I feel I'm unique and what sets me apart from my opponents is that I have statewide executive leadership experience. I've worked in an administrative capacity at the University of Hawaii. I've served on the Board of Education. And perhaps most notably, I was the executive director of the Hawaii High School Athletic Association for 12 years. In that job, I oversaw the athletic programs of all 98 high schools across the state. I've been across the state visiting all 98 high schools and the surrounding communities. And like some veteran political observers have told me, that's as good a training as you're going to get for the governor or lieutenant governor position. It's like holding statewide political office. People are very passionate about sports across the state. And you have to weigh and balance all the competing needs and interests when you're running high school sports across the country, across the state, that is. You have to balance Oahu versus neighbor islands, big school versus small school, larger participation sports like football versus bowling and air riflery and everything in between. And so it taught me a lot of skill sets that I think will apply should I be fortunate enough to win the lieutenant governor's race. And it, more importantly, gave me the opportunity to be in every community, actively in every community, getting to know the people, getting to know the leaders in every community. And my opponents, they're all worthy in their own right, but they haven't had that kind of hands-on experience that I've had throughout my career.
In continuing that conversation about the role of the lieutenant governor, what specific areas do you feel that you would like to focus on specifically if given the opportunity to serve in this role?
Well, far and away, the biggest concern of people across the state, as it should be, is the extremely high cost of living. Hawaii is largely unaffordable for the vast majority of residents across the state. They're very concerned. It shows in the numbers. Record numbers of people are leaving the state because they can't make ends meet. Of course, the biggest expense in everyone's household is housing. We need to build more affordable housing. This is an issue that's been around for 50 years. Our elected officials have failed miserably in addressing this issue. By most accounts, we need up to 65,000 units to meet demand. And so I'm committed to work with our next governor to address the affordable housing shortage across our state.
And what specifically do you think that the lieutenant governor, of course, in conjunction with the governor, can do to address those needs in the short term?
Well, in the short term, we need a unified approach. We need an all hands on deck approach. And so I look at the governor and lieutenant governor working with our congressional delegation, our county leaders, the legislature, of course, come up with a game plan to just get more housing built and more development projects shovel ready, because it's a crisis that we're facing. The city has started, the city and county of Honolulu, addressing one of the concerns. They're being more aggressive, which I'm glad they are, and that's rooting out the illegal vacation rentals that proliferate our island. It's not only a concern on Oahu, but Maui, Hawaii Island, and Kauai. There's, by some accounts, tens of thousands of illegal vacation rentals that need to be brought back into the housing inventory for our local residents either to purchase or to rent.
Moving on, just looking at some of the themes of your campaign, one of the things that you have spoken out against is corruption. We've seen it in the ads that you've run. It's something that you say that you will tackle. Why has this become sort of a platform for you? And how do you think that this is an issue that is important to voters out there?
Well, that's another issue that sets me apart from my opponents for various reasons. Well, to our career politicians, the third is a lobbyist. They don't want to touch this issue because, frankly, they've benefited by the current system. But until we tackle corruption, until we eliminate it, we're not going to move forward on the issues facing our state, like housing, like homelessness, like climate change. I'm the only candidate in the race that has a clear, defined plan to root out corruption in our legislature. Number one, term limits. Secondly, banning fundraising during the legislative session. Third, eliminating financial conflicts of interest. And fourth, requiring the legislature to comply with sunshine laws. I mean, we've seen the impact of undue influence, of lobbyists, of people who have been indicted for wrongdoing, like Dennis Mitsunaga and Milton Choi, who donated millions in total to our legislators. And that's wrong. Nothing's going to change unless they don't have influence over our elected officials. I mean, two of my opponents have received tens of thousands of dollars from Mitsunaga and Milton Choi, and their colleagues have received a lot. In terms of the legislature, Milton Choi has donated over $220,000 alone. That's not counting his associates, to 56 legislators. There's only 76 legislators in the state legislature. I mean, as one graphic example that I'll show real quickly, this is all the donations that Milton Choi has made to legislators in the last 10 years. It amounts to $220,000, as I mentioned. Today, a different media outlet reported that during this past legislative session, legislators raised over $500,000 during the session. This is despite the public cries to eliminate receiving donations during the legislative session. This is despite Ty Cullen and Kalani English, two legislators who were indicted early on in the legislative session. Now, the legislators can say, well, a rule was not passed to disallow receiving funds during the session, but they could have voluntarily chosen not to receive funds. But one of my opponents, House Finance Chair Sylvia Luke, it was reported received over $115,000 in donations during this session, despite the scrutiny, despite the criticism. And, at a minimum, it's tone deafness, if not arrogance and indifference to the public. And that's what the public is upset about that our legislators are not listening to working families across the state. In total, Ms. Luke has received over $800,000 in donations. My team detailed it in 30 pages of documents. And so that's an important issue to me. And until we address the corruption, we're not going to get to the key issues facing our state.
You know, one of those key issues is managing tourism, and I'd like to get your thoughts. There's been a lot of talk about adding perhaps a green fee, if you will, an eco tax for new arrivals, and also this idea of charging on a per person basis for certain attractions like Diamond Head, Haleakala, making reservations there. Do you think that this should be a broader statewide effort, that we have more of these user fees, if you will, for high attraction points? On the flip side, you know, we like to think of Hawaii as being available to everyone, and that, you know, our aloha is available in spades, but some of these resources are being loved to death. So how do we balance that? And what's your opinion on these fees?
I'm in favor of those fees because our visitors are taxing our resources. You know, they're driving on our roads, they're hiking our trails, they're going to our beaches, and there's a cost to that. And so I think most of our tourists would understand that you know, if they're utilizing our resources, they should pay their fair share. So I'm in support of that, as long as the revenue generated goes directly towards those resources. It's only fair. Now, in terms of making Hawaii available to everyone, in theory, that's great, but we're an island state. We have finite resources and we have capacity issues already. So we need to better manage tourism so that it's a positive experience for both visitors and residents alike.
There's been a lot of talk of diversity each and every election cycle, away from just a dependency on tourism. What other industry do you think that Hawaii can begin to pivot to, and what specifically would you suggest to help, you know, enhance these other industries outside of tourism?
Well, I'll first say I hate to sound like a broken record, but we've talked about diversifying our economy for decades as well. And again, we keep electing the same elected officials who make the same promises, and nothing changes. One of the areas that I really believe we need to look towards is renewable energy. We have every renewable energy source at our disposal in Hawaii. We need to go full speed ahead on 100% renewable energy. We have no excuse to not do it sooner than 2045. Not only will it help our climate, but it'll save us money. It makes no sense to import billions of dollars of oil into our state when we can be a 100% renewable energy state. We should be the leader in renewable energy across the world. We should teach the world how to do it. We can create high-paying jobs not only within the state, but export it in terms of being consultants, being advisors to other states and countries on how best to get to 100% renewable energy. The other industry that I think is important for us to look at and put emphasis on, another one that we've talked about for decades with little results, is agriculture. We saw at the beginning of the pandemic how dangerous we are in terms of food security. We can't keep importing 90% of our food from outside of Hawaii. We need to be less reliant on non-Hawaii food products. We have the best climate to grow a lot of crops that are profitable, that are healthier, and again, make us less vulnerable to food security issues.
You know, you talked about talking to folks, engaging voters on quality of life issues. And one of the things we hear again and again is that people are so frustrated with the homeless situation across our state, not just in the urban core of Honolulu, but really more and more wherever you go, you really feel the impact of this issue. What specifically do you think that the state can do as opposed to what the counties are trying to do when it comes to addressing homelessness, particularly the folks who perhaps have mental health issues or are chronically homeless?
So just like the housing issue, it's going to take an all hands on deck approach. Homelessness is out of control across our state. I've been campaigning across the state and you see it everywhere. I was in Hilo yesterday and I was last in Hilo. I've been to Hilo several times over the last 6 months. it's gotten progressively worse in just 6 months. So what the state and city need to do is partner with each other, partner with our federal delegation, and come up with a comprehensive plan to address homelessness. But the number one measure that we can take, in my opinion, is to increase our mental health services across the state. It's clear that a lot of our homeless are suffering from mental health issues and or substance abuse issues. They need the help. They're not getting it. And leaving them on the streets doesn't help them. And of course, it doesn't help us. So that's one area that we need to do, increase mental health services. And of course, build more housing. A lot of our homelessness problem is created because people can't afford to live or find a place to stay. And so those are two areas that we need to address and attack immediately.
A lot of that also has to do with just the cost of living, and cost for everything. It continues to go up as, we fight through this inflation and all the other factors that are happening around the world that is ultimately impacting us here in Hawaii. I want to get your thoughts about just the overall cost of living, thoughts on how you believe Hawaii can change that narrative of just how expensive it is to live here in paradise, and the amount of residents that we are losing that are moving away to the mainland because of this.
So you pointed it out just now, Ryan. I mean, one of my biggest concerns about the high cost of living, the lack of affordable housing, is that our younger families in particular are moving out in droves. We are in danger of losing our entire generation of younger people if we don't act fast. I mean, what working family can afford a $1 million home? That's the median price of a home here on Oahu. I mean, well, what family, period, can afford a $1.1 million home if they're just starting out raising a family? It's unsustainable. It's crazy. The biggest expense, as I mentioned earlier, is housing costs for people. So we need to build more affordable housing, but we also need to diversify the economy and create more high-paying jobs. It's all of these issues that have been in existence for decades, and that's why we need new leadership in our elected offices.
I also want to ask you about childcare. The legislature has allocated a significant amount of money to help with early learning. And it's something that the state, frankly, as with a lot of the issues that we covered today, has been talking about for some time. I recently looked it up, and the average cost for private preschool, again, this is private, not public, obviously, because we don't have enough of those, but private preschool is actually higher than it is to pay for in-state tuition at the University of Hawaii, which is pretty shocking. And if you think about that, for the families who are having to pay that, they're at a time in their life when they can least afford that. Do you think that the state can really stand up some of these early education facilities that they've been talking about, given that we're facing the teacher shortage and the facility shortages that they face just to staff existing schools?
Well, as the saying goes, I mean, the question is, how can we afford to? But then my response is, how can we afford not to? Our children, our youth, our future generations are our most important resource. We owe it to them to give them a fighting chance to succeed. Yunji, you have young children. My son is in college. Our son is in college now, but of course, at one point, he was at the age of pre-K or childcare. And those are critical formative years. If they don't get the education that they need, that they deserve at that point, the stats bear out that they're going to have a hard time later in life catching up to the standards that they need to lead a productive adult life. There are too many challenges that get in the way if they aren't provided the necessary childcare services and education. So it's great that the legislature appropriated more money for childcare services. But I will point out that it shouldn't take a pandemic. It shouldn't take all 76 legislators up for election during a reapportionment year. And it shouldn't take legislators seeking higher office. And finally, it shouldn't take an influx of billions of dollars in pandemic money that we're not going to realistically see again to address these important issues like childcare.
Throughout your campaign, you've sort of outlined yourself as an outsider, and we've heard it through our conversation already this morning, really framing yourself as someone who has been outside the world of politics and brings that business experience to this office. I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on how the current administration has done during their time, including Governor Ige and Lieutenant Governor Josh Green, for people that are managing the state with some of the issues that you're speaking about. How do you feel they've been able to manage things, and your criticism or your compliments for the work that they've done?
Well, I think they're doing the best that they can. They were in a very difficult situation. They're in a situation that none of us have faced in our lifetime, a pandemic. And so they had no playbook upon which to rely on. So overall, I give them credit for doing the best they could under difficult circumstances. To their credit, they did keep, it seems, compared to our counterparts on the mainland or on the continent, COVID counts low and deaths low. And so I give them credit for that. But if anything, what could have been done better is communication. As a private citizen, I was confused at times on mixed messages from the city, from the state, from within the state, at times between the governor and lieutenant governor. And so I thought that could have been better. There could have been a more unified front, if you will, in terms of communicating, so we all knew what was going on. I know in speaking to small businesses during the pandemic, they were especially restaurants, they were in a tough position, because in a restaurant you need to order food ahead of time, and a lot of the food is perishable. And so whenever there was a shutdown with little notice, that really hurt them, because they couldn't sell food. They had to dispose of the food, and that was a big expense for them. So I guess overall, I would say communication could have been better, and towards the end of the pandemic, it did get better.
I'm interested, we've had a chance to get to know you over the last few years, because obviously you did run for mayor and now running for lieutenant governor. We know your professional accomplishments and your resume, but what is not on those documents that you wish people knew about you? What's perhaps a fun fact or something that you wish the public would know that would help them to better understand who you are and how you approach this job?
Well, one thing I learned from the mayoral campaign, and maybe even this campaign, I mean, in Hawaii, it's local style. You don't brag about yourself, you don't tout your accomplishments. But I guess in hindsight, perhaps I should have more in the mayor's race, and maybe even in this race. I would like the public to know, and those who do know me, especially in the sports realm or the education realm, that everything I've ever done throughout my career has been for the greater good. I've never personally benefited from any of my achievements or the networks that I've been able to establish. I've always tried to utilize it to make our communities better. And whether it's raising the funding so Roosevelt High School could get a new field and a track and a new scoreboard, or buying buses, or raising the money for Lanai and Molokai High School's athletic programs because their buses broke down and they don't have buses to transport their athletes, or to raise money to save JV sports in our public schools. Everything I've done has always been for the greater good of the community. And certainly I didn't do it myself. I want to make clear, I had a lot of help from the private sector, from communities, from everyday working families. And so that's what I wish people knew even more about me, beyond the sports community or the younger communities throughout the state.
When you look at this race and the polling that has happened, it's clear that there is no real front runner, that there is a lot of the four of you are sort of all within arm's reach of each other, but there is a large number of undecided voters that are still out there making up their mind. Why do you think that there is this many undecided voters at this point in time in the race? And how are you going to plan on spending the next few weeks, without, of course, giving away all your secrets of campaign strategy, but moving forward, how do you reach those large population of undecided voters?
Well, if you recall from the mayor's race, especially in the primary election, I don't do well in polls. I don't like them because I don't do well in them. But when it counted, I did okay. I did the best poll I did. I fared in was the actual election results in the primary election. And so polls are interesting. They're a great conversation topic, but the only poll that counts is on August 13th. And so Ryan, to your question, there's a lot of undecideds because, frankly, the lieutenant governor race doesn't get as much attention as the governor's race. More people are focused on that. More media coverage is placed on the governor's race. And so people are only now starting to pay attention to the lieutenant governor's race. And so, it's up for grabs. I mean, I feel if I get my message across, that I'll fare very, very well. That people do want change. They want someone that's not a career politician or a lobbyist like my opponents, and that I'll do what I've always done, and that's serve the communities and act in the best interest of the greater good.
I want to ask a little bit of fun stuff in the last few minutes that we have left. I'd love to know, other than your family, what's the one thing you can't live without?
That's a good question. I mean, an extension of that are my friends. Those are the most valuable things in life. I mean, material possessions, I suppose, are good to have or nice to have, but it's the relationships that I've developed through the years. I've met a lot of good people throughout my career, and that's what I cherish the most. That's what's most meaningful. Throughout this campaign, I've got a lot of support from non-traditional political supporters, if you will. They've never been involved in a campaign before. They're not party stalwarts, if you will, that are in elections and work on campaigns year after year. And they're coming to help me because they believe in me and they want to create a better future for the entire state, especially our younger generation. So that's been rewarding throughout this campaign trail, throughout the islands that I visited, because they're coming out in force. They've never been involved politically. Some of them have never voted before, but they believe in me. They believe in the future that I can bring to them. And that's what I appreciate the most.
Well, our time is almost up, but before we let you go, we want to allow you one final thought and message to those voters out there who may be undecided. We've given the same opportunity to all your opponents who have been on this program. Just your final message this morning as we close out.
Well, I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to speak to the voters on the eve of the election. And unlike my competitors, I haven't been in office a collective 35 years. I'm not a career politician. I'm not a lobbyist. I've never received money from Milton Choi or Dennis Mitsunaga or others. I'll bring a fresh, clean perspective. To take a cue from an Einstein phrase, the definition of insanity is electing the same officials into office over and over again and expecting a different result. I have the broad-based experience, I have the passion, I have the enthusiasm, and I will give my 100% commitment to the people of Hawaii if you give me the opportunity to serve you as your lieutenant governor. I won't let you down, and please consider supporting me, and I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
Keith Amemiya, candidate for lieutenant governor, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Aloha.
Well, great to hear from him. And if you missed any of the conversations with his opponents, you can catch those on the Star-Advertiser Spotlight Hawaii page. We have a full archive there of our conversations. Interesting to hear from him, Ryan, very consistent in his messaging, presenting himself consistently as an outsider and really trying to draw a distinction between him and his opponents, particularly on the issue of corruption and donations.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that, about, the fact, again, leveraging off the fact that he has not received any sort of campaign contributions from those who are under investigation or who have been indicted. Also saying and pointing fingers and highlighting how one of his opponents, Representative Sylvia Luke, received money during this last legislative session. He also talked about his plan and one of the priorities for him moving forward, if he is able to ascend to this position of lieutenant governor, would be affordable housing, something that we have heard time and time again from many leaders and many of his opponents who have come on this show, speaking of the importance of trying to find ways to get people homes here on our islands.
Right. Talking also about his experience on all the islands and really highlighting his work in sports and saying that that served basically as a training ground for doing this kind of work, because you've represented and interacted with schools throughout the state, and trying to draw on that experience then to get to this next higher office. Interesting to hear. I always like the personal stuff, so that other than his family, his friends are the thing that he values most in life. And just hearing about the grind of the campaign, going to all the neighbor islands and those experiences. But it seems that he is enjoying this journey, and it was great to hear from him this morning.
Yeah, and again, a lot of undecideds in the polls that we've seen thus far, and so we'll see really who ascends to the top of this race here with these four leading Democratic candidates. Again, as we mentioned, those ballots are set to arrive in mailboxes within the next few days, and we'll begin to see some of those ramping up of campaign ads on air as people begin to make their final decisions. We continue our conversation about the election on Friday. This time focusing on the race for governor on the Republican side of the ticket, where we'll be speaking with former Lieutenant Governor Duke Iona about his entrance into the race, a late entry by many regards, but getting his thoughts on entering the race and why he would like to run for this office yet again. Again, he has sought to ascend to the governorship twice before, unsuccessfully, and this time again deciding to once again throw his hat into the ring to run for this race. We look forward to catching up with the former lieutenant governor and now gubernatorial candidate. We hope you will join us here on Friday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Until then, take care and aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.